Sherry Rasmussen was born on February 7, 1957. Sherry was living in Van Nuys, California, outside of Los Angeles, and was a much-loved nurse at the Glendale Adventist Medical Center. She was described as thoughtful, sympathetic, and friendly, and was said to be the life of the hospital where she worked. Sherry had entered college at the age of 16, and by her late 20s was the director of nursing at the hospital, giving presentations and teaching classes for fellow nurses. In 1984, Sherry met 27-year-old John Rutten, a computer engineer, and about a year later, the couple married and moved into an apartment together. But a crazy ex-girlfriend of John's would wreak havoc in their lives, and John didn't help matters. His ex-LAPD officer Stephanie Lazarus met John during college, and the two had an on-and-off-again relationship. However, John only considered Lazarus a friend with benefits and was never truly serious about her. But Lazarus was obsessed with him, and although she knew John wasn't dedicated to her, she never let that change her feelings. So, when Lazarus discovered that John was engaged to Sherry, she didn't take the news well. Lazarus asked John to come over and begged him not to marry Sherry, revealing that she loved him. But when John said he had to leave, she asked if they could be together one more time, which he agreed to. But that would make matters worse and cause Lazarus to become even more obsessed. Soon after, she showed up at their home wearing revealing workout clothes, holding her skis. She asked John to wax them, and despite Sherry's objections, he complied. After she left, Sherry asked if their relationship was truly over, and John convinced her the two were just friends. A few days later, after John left for work, Stephanie returned to pick up the waxed skis in uniform and armed. Sherry pleaded with her fiancé to tell Lazarus to stop coming by. John said there was nothing to their relationship and asked Sherry to ignore her. But over the next few weeks, Lazarus kept visiting Sherry and John for random chores. While Sherry had had enough of her fiancé's ex-lover in her life, she was scared to complain because Lazarus was in the police force, making her feel powerless and hopeless. According to Sherry's father, Nels Rasmussen, Lazarus later visited Sherry at her office in the hospital to tell her that things were not over between her and John and threatened that no one could have him if she couldn't. In addition, she told Sherry that John had slept with her 2 days earlier. Sherry was afraid of Lazarus, but forgave John, and the couple was married in November 1985. But that didn't stop her from stalking and harassing Sherry. A few months after the wedding, on the morning of February 24, 1986, John left the couple's condo on Balboa Boulevard in Van Nuys to go to work. Sherry was scheduled to give a motivational speech at work that day but called in sick instead. John tried to call Sherry later to check on her, but she never answered or returned his call, which was very unusual for her. When John came home from work, he noticed the garage door open, broken glass on the driveway, and Sherry's car was missing. When he entered the condo, Sherry was dead and had been attacked and shot. The entire apartment was ransacked with shattered glass, and atoms were strewn throughout. Even the appliances were out of place. It appeared that Sherry had put up a fierce fight with her killer. Authorities collected blood samples, bite mark swabs, and fingerprints from the crime scene. Earlier in the day, around noon, 2 gardeners in the compound found Sherry's purse. Also, maid cleaning a nearby unit said she heard something that sounded like 2 people fighting and then something falling at around 12:30 p.m. During the investigation, the police discovered that only the couple's marriage license and the BMW he bought for Sherry as an engagement gift were missing. The lead detective quickly concluded that 2 men committed the murder as part of a botched robbery, and nothing said by her friends and family would change that perspective. The theory was that the robbers didn't know that Sherry was home, and when they saw her in the apartment, they attacked her. But many aspects of the crime were improbable for a break-in, especially one committed in daylight. Sherry's jewelry box was in plain view on top of her dresser and didn't appear to have been touched. The condo was in the middle of a gated complex surrounded by other units from which burglars could have expected to be easily observed. The front door had an alarm warning and was never forced open. The BMW was found abandoned a week later but yielded no new evidence. The medical examiner found the bite mark unusual, as bites during struggles are much more commonly inflicted by women while most burglars are men. But still, detectives stuck to their burglary theory. The police searched for 2 men who were suspects in a theft case, and while there was no evidence to tie them to the murder, they continued to pursue them. Sherry's parents knew about some of the crazy things that Lazarus had said and done to Sherry and repeatedly asked the police to look into her, but the police wouldn't consider the possibility of her involvement. John quit his job and moved away from Los Angeles shortly after the murder. However, Lazarus' journal entries provided some interesting information. She noted that she missed John so much that she was ready to do anything to get him back. She had convinced herself that she should separate Sherry and John to be happy. Despite the crazy backstory involving Lazarus, Sherry, and John, the police never bothered to check on Lazarus. They didn't even consider her as a suspect. Instead, they would dismiss the idea whenever her name came up. Over the months, there was no progress in Sherry's murder case. With no other leads, the case would go cold and the police would move on to other cases. But Sherry's parents were determined and never gave up. They made it their goal to get justice for their daughter Sherry. They often urged the police to continue with the investigation and believed their daughter's case could be solved with the new DNA technology. However, when Sherry's father requested a DNA test, the police rejected his plea. They claimed they had no budget, suspects, or time to work on the case. Even when Sherry's father offered to pay for the process, they didn't agree. For some reason, the police were no longer interested in the case. In the meantime, Lazarus continued working with the LAPD and went on to start her own private investigation firm, Unique Investigations. In 1987, she earned medals including 1 gold at the World Police and Fire Games in San Diego. 3 years later, she married a fellow officer and adopted a daughter with him. She would ultimately move back to Semi Valley, California, and became an instructor at the police academy. John eventually remarried as well but didn't pressure the police like his former father-in-law. Meanwhile, the Rasmussens said the detectives at the Van Nuys office continued to be unhelpful and even hung up on them and sometimes put them on hold for long periods of time. Finally, a year after the murder, the frustrated family reiterated their offer at a press conference and called for more action. Nels wrote to Daryl Gates, then chief of the LAPD, about the possibility that Lazarus might have been involved. However, detectives told him he watched too much TV. But that didn't deter Sherry's father, and he was relentless for over 2 decades that he was never going to let anyone forget about the injustice his daughter suffered. In 2004, an LAPD lab technician, Jennifer Francis, noticed Sherry's file and it intrigued her and she started looking into it. She saw that Sherry's arm had a bite mark and wanted to run tests on it. But when she went looking for the evidence, it was missing. The evidence could not be located in department files, suggesting the samples were intentionally lost. Only the bite swab was located, which she found hidden in the coroner's freezer a week later. Jennifer sent the bite impression for testing and discovered it belonged to a woman, proving the theory of 2 male robbers wrong. She then went to the lead detective from 18 years ago for information on the case. She asked about the suspects and why Sherry's father pushed to inquire about an LAPD officer. The detective disregarded her questions and asked her to drop the case. So, Jennifer moved on from her investigation but would later find numerous other discrepancies in evidence that had been covered up, destroyed, or manipulated. By 2009, crime in LA had declined enough from its earlier levels that detectives began looking into cold cases to increase their clearance rates. A cold case detective read Sherry's case file and found it interesting. The fact that several things didn't add up kept nagging him. The squad reopened the case and started looking into the suspects and pieces of evidence again. They came up with 5 female suspects. They quickly eliminated 4 suspects, leaving only 1 woman, Stephanie Lazarus. Questioning Lazarus would take a lot of work because she was a high-profile police officer and a very aggressive person. She had a lot of connections and one mistake could have dire consequences. The detectives started secretly looking into her. No paper trail or digital records were maintained, and they took immense caution to find even the slightest details. Finally, they got the proof they needed after secretly obtaining a used soda can from her and sent it off for DNA testing. The test results were a match, and the detectives quickly worked on getting a warrant. Knowing that arresting her wouldn't be easy, the police staged a fake interview in the LAPD headquarters and asked Lazarus for help. They did this because she had to submit her guns before entering the building. Initially, Lazarus needed clarification about the situation because she was told she would need to interview a suspect. But little did she know, the detectives were actually interrogating her. By the end of an hour-long interview, the officers arrested Stephanie Lazarus. She was charged with first-degree murder, and because she was a high-profile police officer and a significant flight risk, her bail was set at $10 million. Throughout the trial, Lazarus maintained her innocence. The prosecution theorized that on February 24, 1986, Lazarus picked the lock on Sherry and John's door and entered the condo. When Lazarus saw Sherry, she fired a shot from her .38 caliber revolver, hitting a window. Sherry ran, but Lazarus ran after her. The two struggled in a fight to the death. Sherry was taller than Lazarus and strong, but Lazarus was a police officer trained for combat. She bit Sherry on the forearm, causing her to let go of a sleeper hold she had on Lazarus, who then smashed a vase on her head. Sherry stopped struggling after being struck in the head with the butt of her revolver. Lazarus then wrapped a blanket around the pistol's barrel to act as a silencer and then fatally shot Sherry. Once Sherry died, Lazarus got to work, making the murder look like a home invasion and robbery gone wrong. She knocked over her furniture, pulled out the drawers and stacked a VCR and CD player, as if the alleged robbers escaped what they intended to steal in the house after murdering Sherry. Lazarus remained a free woman and a police officer for 26 years after the murder, but she was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to 27 years in prison and an additional 2 years for the illegal use of firearms. The Rasmussens tried to sue the LAPD for police negligence, but the statute of limitations prevented them from doing that. Although John was never a suspect, he also was not forthright with police about what had previously happened with Lazarus. In 1989, a few years after Sherry's murder, John began briefly sleeping with Lazarus again. Interestingly, the detective's notes show that John had called and asked if he was sure there was no evidence linking Lazarus with his late wife's death. Alyssa Turney was born on April 3, 1984, and lived in Paradise Valley, Arizona. At the age of 17, she lived with her stepfather, Michael Turney, and her half-sister, 12-year-old Sarah Turney. Her mother, Barbara Strom, died of cancer when Alyssa was 8, and then Michael legally adopted her. Michael also had 3 sons who were already out of the house by that time. Their home had a passive recording system that recorded all phone calls coming in and going out and surveillance cameras that automatically recorded to VHS tapes. One camera was hidden in the living room vent facing the couch and another was in their driveway, capturing the main door used for the home. James Turney, one of Michael's sons, wanted to give Alyssa and Sarah a place to stay after their mother's death. He didn't feel like their father was treating the girls right and was generally afraid for their safety. Michael's behavior showed that he needed constant control and dominance over Alyssa. On May 17, 2001, Michael dropped Alyssa off at school for the last day of her junior year of high school. He then picked her up and took her to lunch. They then allegedly got into an argument during the meal because Alyssa was asking for more privileges in the home. When they arrived home, Alyssa was very upset and went straight to her bedroom. Michael then claims he left to run an errand at 1 p.m. and then went to pick up Sarah. He says when they returned home, they found a note in Alyssa's bedroom which read that she was running away to California, and he quickly reported her missing. Alyssa had been looking forward to attending a graduation party that same night but would never arrive. The police didn't initially suspect foul play and believed she had just run away. But strangely, her cell phone and other belongings remained behind, including $1,800 in her bank account. 7 days later, Michael claimed that he received a phone call from a payphone in California. He said Alyssa swore at him and then hung up the phone. Despite the recording devices around the house, there was no video or audio from Alyssa's last day in the home or from the phone call he allegedly received from her. He stated that all of those devices had strangely failed. He also said that he did have the video surveillance from Alyssa's last day, but refused to give it to the police, stating there was nothing of interest on the tape. The year before her disappearance, Michael called Child Protective Services to tell them that if Alyssa ever filed a child molestation complaint against him, she was lying. He said the cameras and recording devices were for security reasons, not so he could observe his children's activities. For years before her disappearance, Sarah made a home video of Alyssa and her father in which Alyssa comments about Michael being a pervert, causing him to quickly shut off the camera. There's also a video of him sitting in his car in a parking lot filming Alyssa while she's working at a restaurant. 6 years later, in 2006, Seth-proclaimed serial killer Thomas Albert Heimer told a corrections officer that he had killed Alyssa. But when Phoenix police questioned him, they determined that he had never had any contact with Alyssa, and he admitted he might have confused her with a different victim. Heimer's story brought renewed attention to Alyssa's case. In addition, friends and family who had allegedly never been initially contacted by police in 2001 began to make disturbing allegations to authorities concerning Michael's relationship with his stepdaughter. Her sister said it finally forced them to look at the case again. In 2008, investigators from the Phoenix Police Department Missing Persons Unit opened Alyssa's case and declared that foul play was a factor in her disappearance. Michael then changed his story and claimed that Alyssa was killed by 2 assassins from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and that she was buried in Desert Center, California. At that point, Michael would become the primary suspect in the case. Authorities raided his home and seized 19 high-caliber assault rifles, 2 handmade silencers, a van filled with gasoline cans, and 26 handmade explosive devices filled with gunpowder and roofing nails. It was the largest stockpile of explosives ever discovered by the Phoenix Police Department. They also found a 98-page manifesto titled Diary of a Madman Martyr, outlining his plans for a rampage against the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in Phoenix. According to the document, Michael worked as an electrician in the 1980s and complained about workplace conditions. The document states that he planned to blow up the Union Hall in revenge and unalive himself in the process. Michael was arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced to 10 years in jail after pleading guilty to possessing 26 unregistered explosives, but was released 7 years later in 2017. In August 2020, Michael Turney was finally arrested, indicted, and charged by a grand jury on second-degree murder charges in the death of Alyssa. There's an amazing podcast about this case that Alyssa's sister does herself. It's called Voices for Justice. Once, while questioning her father about Alyssa's disappearance, he finally told her that he would give her all the honest answers on his deathbed. He said, "Be at the deathbed, Sarah, and I will give you all the honest answers you want to hear." He also said he would confess to everything if the state agreed to give him a lethal injection within 10 days. At the age of 53, Captain James Tappan Hall was a special deputy sheriff for Montgomery County, Maryland, and was a married father of 2 and had 4 grandchildren. He also worked part-time security for the Manor Country Club in the 14,900 block of Carrollton Road in Rockville, Maryland. On October 23, 1971, after 10:30 p.m., Captain Hall interrupted a burglary in progress at the country club. He had encountered 2 burglary suspects in the parking lot and attempted to arrest them. Unfortunately, the suspects were armed and would end up shooting Captain Hall. The country club's drink machines had been broken into and a house nearby had been robbed. Items stolen from the home were found near Captain Hall's body in the country club's parking lot along with his service weapon that had never been fired. Captain Hall was taken to the hospital but would succumb to his injuries 3 days later. Police were unable to track down his killer and the case went unsolved for the next 51 years. That is until 2021 when detectives from the Cold Case Unit decided to review the case with fresh eyes on the 50th anniversary of the murder. Detective K. Leggett and Corporal L. Killen re-examined old files and witness interviews until they narrowed the search down to one man, Larry David Smith, also known as Larry David Becker. He had been interviewed in 1973, but was never labeled a suspect. He soon moved to Little Falls, New York, and in 1975, he ditched the last name Smith and changed it to Becker. 71-year-old Smith was interviewed on September 1, 2022, and admitted he shot Captain Hall, but claimed it was an accident and said he didn't even know he had died. With Becker's confession in hand, he was arrested later that day and charged with the murder of Captain James Tappan Hall. This story contains graphic and disturbing images of child abuse. I struggled to decide what images to include, which are hard for me to see too. The social and government systems that should protect children failed Adrian Jones. By publishing this video, I hope to shine a light on these possible failures. Adrian Alexander Jones was born on May 5, 2008, the fifth of 6 children born to Dana Pierce and an evil soulless man named Michael Jones. He was filled by the adults in his life, the state, and all that could have done something to save him. Michael and Pierce broke up after he started having an affair with an equally as horrible woman named Heather. In September 2011, when Adrian was 2 years old, Michael got custody of the 3 children he fathered with Pierce. Reports say that in 2012, the Kansas Department for Children and Families removed Adrian and his siblings from their biological mother's care because of neglect and lack of supervision. However, Dana claims that DCF was never in her home, never did an investigation into his safety while under her care, and that Adrian was never removed from her home. Instead, she says her mother, Judy Conway, took Adrian away from her and placed him in the care of his father and stepmother. Regardless, Judy wanted the children, but the state told her the kid's father wanted custody, and he got it. Meanwhile, Michael and Heather rented a 4-bedroom home in an isolated area set on 15 acres of land in the 5200 block of North 99th Street in Kansas City, Kansas. At the time, Heather was pregnant and the couple had 6 other children in the home, isolated under the guise of homeschooling. Their landlord, Jennifer Hovers, went inside the home after they moved in. She found it odd that there were so many surveillance cameras inside the house. She assumed it was for protection because Michael was a bail bondsman. But little did she know that the home she was renting out would soon become a house of horrors. A place where unthinkable things would occur. A place that was hell on earth for precious little innocent Adrian. His father and stepmother would endlessly torture Adrian and do things that even seasoned authorities had trouble digesting. In December of 2011, this photo was taken of Adrian by Officer Wall after Adrian reported abuse at the hands of Michael and Heather. Even in his sad-looking state, nothing was done. In 2012, Adrian's grandmother Judy and Adrian's older sister Kiki visited him at Christmas and all appeared to be okay. But when they left, they didn't know it would be the last time they would see precious Adrian alive. While under the so-called care of Heather and Michael, what he endured cannot be explained in words, but his story still deserves to be told. So I will do the best I can. Just a couple of months after his father and stepmother received custody, Adrian and his siblings told other adults about the abuse they suffered at home from their parents. The children reported that Adrian suffered the most abuse out of all the children. For example, the children said they saw lines on him and said he was choked one night while he was in the bathroom with Heather. DCF investigated and learned that Heather hit the children with objects or her hand, leaving whelps and bruises. The children said the father also used physical discipline, but it didn't seem to be as severe as the physical discipline Heather used. Michael told DCF he and Heather would split up and he would ensure that she would not have contact with the children, and a safety plan was put in place. However, that plan didn't last, and unbeknownst to DCF, the couple had reunited. DCF would only find out after a report was filed regarding Adrian not getting proper medical care for his mental health needs in August 2013. The family moved numerous times between Kansas and Missouri, making it challenging for DCF to keep up with them. But DCF in both states still received reports of abuse. Soon after moving across the state line to Missouri, someone called to report that Heather was selling meth from their house and Adrian was seen eating out of trash cans. The Kansas City Star reports that numerous people made repeated hotline calls saying he was being neglected and beaten at home by his father and stepmother. But like most of these cases, very little was done to protect the children. The family then stopped communicating with Missouri authorities and moved across the state line again back into Kansas. In 2013, a Missouri Children's Division social worker and police officer spoke with Adrian. The files released by DCF revealed the agency had extensive interactions with the family, during which Adrian disclosed the abuse to social workers. The little boy told them, "Daddy kicks me. He keeps hitting me in the head and punches me in the stomach, and Mom keeps pulling on my ears and it really hurts." He added that his parents always locked me in my room and I have to sleep without a pillow and blanket. He also said he was forced to do push-ups all day long. The Kansas City Star reported that the Missouri Children's Division found a large amount of evidence that Adrian had been neglected in July 2013. Missouri had planned to provide in-home services to the family even though the family failed to cooperate with Missouri authorities. At one point, the family tried to give Adrian to the authorities, yet they would not take him. Apparently, nothing was done about anything. Because Adrian reported the abuse and no one saved him, Michael and Heather began keeping him confined in their shower. They did this to keep him from being able to tell anyone about the abuse he was suffering. In 2014, Adrian spent a few months in a residential treatment center after being diagnosed with PTSD. Michael called Adrian's grandmother Judy and told her that Adrian was in a psychiatric hospital because he was a pedophile. Even with these outlandish lies about Adrian, he was still not removed from the care of Michael and Heather. Combining Kansas and Missouri's abuse files would eventually amount to more than 2,500 pages. I know I'm saying this a lot, but it's important. Adrian was never, not even once, removed from Michael and Heather's custody. Therefore, he endured several years of unfathomable torture, beatings, isolation, and starvation. Fast forward to November 5, 2015, Heather called the police to report domestic abuse at the hands of Michael. When the police arrived, Heather told them her husband had tried to shoot her. The house was filthy and had bullet holes in the walls. Trash was strewn throughout the house, along with dead mice, rat poison, syringes, and pornography videos on the floor and the countertops. At this point, the 7 children in the home ranged from 2 to 10 years old. But one thing was missing: Adrian. The police were very familiar with the family and were concerned when Adrian could not be found. Shockingly, Heather told them if they looked around the property, they'd find the remains of a child. Police returned the following day and found partial human remains in a livestock pen near the barn, and later identified them as belonging to Adrian. After spending most of his life severely abused, Adrian was murdered by his father and stepmother and died alone on the floor of a dirty shower after starving to death. Because he became too weak to stand up or lean against a wall, Michael and Heather strapped him to a chair and left him in the shower to die. His body remained there for 2 weeks until the smell became overwhelming. Then, his parents went out and purchased pigs. They intentionally did not feed the pigs for a while to ensure they were extremely hungry. Shortly after the Joneses were arrested, the landlord said Heather gave her the passwords for her computer because she wanted her to send pictures of her children while she awaited trial in custody. The landlord had no idea she was logging into a nightmare of gruesome evidence. As soon as she opened iCloud, she found pictures of Adrian's abuse. She took the evidence to the police and then to Adrian's grandmother. The abuse began with Adrian being forced to stand for hours with his hands in the air. Several photos show the 7-year-old strapped to a table and blindfolded. Heather Jones also shared these pictures with groups of people on Facebook. She discussed and shared stories of torturing young Adrian. Heather had even saved online ads for straitjackets and blanket wraps for transporting human bodies. Photos showed his face was cracked with a broomstick. He was forced to eat out of a maggot-infested bowl outside his home with his hands tied behind his back. He was stripped naked and confined to a shower stall for hours and even strapped to an inversion table. He had been strapped to the inversion table so much that his little hands and ankles were permanently swollen. Heather even shared some pictures with her friends on Facebook, yet no one reported them. There were messages throughout Facebook talking about tossing him. Many of the photos show mysterious marks on Adrian's body. The couple even took photographs of Adrian's deteriorating health, documenting it as if they were proud of the torture they inflicted upon him. Surveillance video shows Adrian's hands and feet handcuffed while he was forced to stay outside. One video clip shows Adrian trying to use his mouth to pick up what appears to be a bowl and eat whatever is in it. At that point, his stepmother, Heather, comes into the video and seems to be lecturing Adrian. He would regularly be shocked with a stun gun for 20 seconds. During the trial, the prosecutor stayed quiet for 20 seconds to let the court realize how long that time was. In the distressing video, Adrian desperately tries to drink from a cup, but he can't pick it up because his wrists are handcuffed behind his back. Most of Adrian's last days were spent stripped naked and confined to a shower stall for hours. The Joneses also forced their son to stand in neck-deep water in the family's filthy swimming pool overnight in winter in Kansas. One video shows him being forced to hold tiki torches over his head for long periods. It looked like there were a lot of taser marks and then a lot of swelling from being strapped to the inversion table and handcuffed to the wall, and a lot of scratches and stuff from probably trying to get out. There were 32 surveillance cameras in the house to watch him. Adrian went from a healthy little boy to a skeletal one with rotten teeth and sunken eyes. Heather also documented Adrian's abuse in writing. She uploaded notes about it that date back to 2012. In the last months of Adrian's life, his parents stopped calling him by his name. Instead, they called him the boy. In a Facebook message Heather sent to an unknown person, she wrote, "Just strap the boy to my inversion table with handcuffs and ace bandages and put him downstairs." Judy said Michael and Heather wouldn't let her see the kids in the months leading up to Adrian's death. She told the 41 Action News investigators she was worried and contacted the Kansas Department for Children and Families twice. Michael was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Heather was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after less than 30 years. Heather actually had the galls to say that she wasn't strong enough to protect him and felt helpless to protect him from her abusive husband. Adrian can no longer be saved, but other children may be protected in the future if DCF reevaluates its practices and learns from the circumstances surrounding Adrian's death. Community members can contact their local legislators to request a formal review of DCF or DHS, as called in some states. My heart grieves for this little boy who had no one to protect him and only knew abuse and terror. According to the Kansas City Star, a Missouri caseworker said that she made the Kansas caseworker aware that Adrian had disclosed physical abuse by his stepmother and his father. Additionally, the worker commented that she reported the children were homeschooled and had not been seen by any outside members of the family regularly. Kansas DCF Secretary Phyllis Gilmore stated that they last had contact with the family in early 2012. KSHB.com reported that Gilmore said the family's frequently alternating residency between Kansas and Missouri greatly disrupted the continuity of services and evaluation. However, she insisted Kansas child welfare officials often shared information about Adrian when known with their Missouri counterparts. Additionally, Gilmore stated that her agency thoroughly investigated each reported incident of abuse or neglect involving Adrian. They last had contact with the family in early 2012. Which one is it? Kansas DCF refused to release any information regarding the case, something they are known for. A former employee of Michael Jones stated that he witnessed Adrian being abused but never said anything. Also, Adrian's grandmother contacted DCF twice before his murder. Former Deputy Director of DCF, Diane Keach, said she is appalled by the lack of transparency from the agency. She quit the department due to issues similar to this case. Diane stated that DCF often kept these types of child death cases secret from the public and said that the attorney for DCF didn't feel like they should document anything related to a child's death. She wanted only to have a verbal conversation over the phone. She said if we took handwritten notes, we were instructed to shred them afterward. She said she'd personally viewed numerous deaths in Kansas where they missed it. The Joneses weren't the only adults in the home. Another resident by the name of Willie Flowers was living there as well. He can be seen on camera in the house and knew what was happening, but did absolutely nothing. According to Heather, Flowers would often babysit the children. The department said they looked into Flowers after Adrian's death, but didn't have enough evidence to charge him. John Pizzerno, a criminal defense attorney, said it's not a crime to live in a home while a child is being abused or even tortured and killed. In 2017, Kansas Representative Luis Ruiz introduced Adrian's Law, which was signed into law and states adults now must report child abuse or face criminal charges. It is now a requirement that the Kansas DCF physically lay eyes on a child at risk for abuse when visiting the home. They could not just leave the house without an answer. After Adrian died, the 41 Action News investigators spoke to several people who said they contacted DCF before Adrian was killed. Adrian's grandmother also said, Adrian was often hungry and forced to eat plain oatmeal, while his 6 sisters living in the house were given McDonald's. The surveillance video from inside the home shows a very thin and naked Adrian in the kitchen getting what appears to be a bowl of water. The footage shows Adrian cowering behind a cabinet and slowly lowering himself to the ground, as he notices another person entering the room. As the person passes by, Adrian can be seen carrying the bowl as he sneaks out of the room. Adrian's grandmother, Judy Conway, identified that person as Adrian's great-uncle, Willie Flowers. The landlord described the video and said it looked like Adrian had snuck out of the shower and was going to get a bowl of water, and the uncle walked in and Adrian hid and then ran out behind him. Little Adrian was doing everything he could to survive. He tried to escape, tried to get help, tried to eat, and tried to live. He was punished if he was caught trying to eat food. In one of the videos, he was seen being forced to eat from a bowl of applesauce with bugs and dirt in it while his hands were bound. Other photos show him tied up with a plate of food in front of him and a bar of soap in his mouth so that he couldn't eat the food. Alarms were even placed on cabinets so that if Adrian ever tried to get food, Heather and Michael would be notified. His ankles were bent out of shape due to the beatings and restraints. In a Facebook post on Christmas Day in 2014, Heather referenced wanting to simulate a scene in an episode of The Walking Dead where one of the characters shoots a child in the back of the head. The Kansas City Star reported that a Missouri child advocate and CEO of Foster Adopt Connect, Lori Ross, stated that Adrian should have been removed from the home by Missouri authorities after he reported abuse in 2013. Lastly, I hope everyone who sees this will share this story and never allow the child welfare system to forget what happened to young Adrian Jones. Shortly after Adrian's death, records from DCF were sealed by the state of Missouri and Kansas despite a law being in place since 2000 for that states when a child is killed or nearly killed from abuse. The files become public record. It was 2017 before the records in Adrian's file were finally released 4 years after his murder. Family members of Adrian filed a lawsuit seeking $25 million in punitive damages against social workers they say should have removed him from a dangerous situation. The lawsuit filed against social workers from the Missouri Department of Social Services and the Kansas Department for Children and Families alleged that child welfare workers knew Adrian was being physically abused but didn't remove him from his home and just documented the abuse. The lawsuit states the agencies and workers allegedly meticulously investigated and carefully documented every violent kick, punch, slap, and injury inflicted upon Adrian by his sadistic father and stepmother. The agencies allegedly generated stacks of records and reports chronicling the ceaseless stomach-churning abuse. But according to the lawsuit, an intervention was limited and consisted of having the Jones couple sign a piece of paper agreeing to stop torturing the child, the legal equivalent of a pinky swear. I know this was a very hard story for all of us to get through, but sometimes things, no matter how bad they are, still need to be shared. Let's never stop pushing for more protection for these poor innocent children. And while they didn't save Adrian, at least he is no longer suffering. Michael and Heather, I'm sure hell has a special place for you. Chase Allen was born on August 31st, 2018 into a life of hell. When he was only 2 months old, he and his siblings were taken away from their mother, Azure de France, because of abuse and neglect. Unfortunately, 3 months later, all the children were returned over the objections of their grandmother and aunts. Their continued calls to the hotline to report suspected incidents of abuse were to no avail. The children were living in a house at 12,765 Monte Vista Street in Detroit, Michigan, and with the continued abuse and neglect, they were unable to defend or care for themselves. When Chase was 3 years old, his loved ones described him as sweet, shy, and soft-spoken. His family members started noticing that he appeared malnourished and neglected by his abusive mother, France. They offered to take him in and care for him, but she refused. The family says they contacted Child Protective Services and the Detroit Police Department dozens of times, but were told there was nothing they could do. The abuse worsened and Chase ended up going blind for some strange reason. Family members even found him with burns on his body. When France was questioned about it, she told her sister and mother that he burned himself when touching a hot noodle plate. After that incident was reported, CPS was supposed to do 3-month checkups, but the family believes those follow-ups never occurred. Eventually, France told her mother that Chase had gone to live with his paternal grandfather's girlfriend in Coldwater, Michigan. But when his grandfather was released from jail, he refuted France's claim and said that Chase was not living there. France told a different story to neighbors. She said he was living in Alabama with her aunt and uncle because he needed so much care and attention after going blind. A next-door neighbor said she had never met Chase, but she often bought clothing and food for the 5 other children, whom she described as deprived. France has a history of postpartum depression, but refused treatment or therapy. CPS received a complaint that France threatened to harm one of her sons on April 7, 2020, the day after giving birth to him. France has an extensive history with Children's Protective Services. Court records indicate prior contacts with CPS 3 times in 2016 and twice in 2017 due to physical abuse, improper supervision, sexual abuse, failure to protect, and physical neglect. At the time of her 5th child's birth in 2020, her other 4 kids were in foster care due to physical abuse and France's untreated mental health. They were also in foster care in 2018 because she had pleaded guilty to severe physical abuse of her 2-year-old nephew who was temporarily in her care. The child's father, France's brother, had passed away, and the child's mother told CPS workers that she allowed the toddler to live with France for a short time because she needed a break. But she became suspicious that something was wrong when France refused to send her a picture of her son and return him. When the child got to the hospital, his lips were swollen. His left eye was black with a scratch under it, and he had a contusion on his forehead and bruises to his rib cage and ankles. France pleaded guilty to 4th-degree child abuse, a misdemeanor, and the felony charge was dismissed. She received 2 years of probation, which ended in February 2021. It's unclear why, but after France's completed probation on her criminal child abuse case, her children were returned to her. On June 24, 2022, CPS was contacted by an unknown caller for a welfare check to lay eyes on Chase. When the Detroit Police Department officers arrived at France's home, she opened the door and tried to push the officers away as if nothing was going on. The officers ignored her and went inside to find 5 other children living in squalor. A 3-month-old girl, a 2-year-old boy, a 5-year-old boy, a 7-year-old boy, and a 9-year-old girl. As France continued to talk, they recognized that something was wrong with the conversation and how she communicated with them. Suddenly, France admitted that Chase was in the basement refrigerator. Officer Matthew McKinney entered the basement, opened the freezer, and found a red, white, and blue bag. When he opened it a bit, he made a horrific discovery: Chase's decomposing body. It wasn't immediately clear when Chase died or how long he had been in the freezer. France said he had medical issues and died, so she put him in the freezer. It was later determined that he had 2 skull fractures and was malnourished. His cause of death was blunt force trauma, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide. France said she kicked him in the chest, and when he wouldn't wake up the next day, she put his body in the freezer where it remained for 3 months. France admitted to abusing Chase often because she would get frustrated with him, especially after he went blind, but did not ever hitting him in the head. The other 5 children were taken to the hospital to be evaluated. Once their physical health was assessed, the children underwent kids' talk, a forensic interview with investigators and a child psychologist. They were then placed in the custody of Child Protective Services until the family took them in to care for them. France was charged with 1st-degree murder, 1st-degree child abuse, torture, and concealing a death. The medical examiner said it takes more force to fracture a child's skull than an adult's because kids have more water content in their skulls. During an interview, France admitted that she didn't want Chase, but was too scared of losing her other kids to say anything about it. She said she'd never had a blind child before and had no help caring for her children. Toni Haynes, France's mother, says she is mourning the loss of her grandson and is sickened and outraged that he died at the hands of her own child. Shockingly, media interest in this story dropped off after a few days, and amazingly, there was little to no coverage of the preliminary court hearings on the case. Even worse, there has been no response to the tragedy from the Detroit City Council, the Michigan legislature, or community activists. Unfortunately, Chase is one of many children each year in the state of Michigan that die of abuse or neglect, and in many of the cases, CPS was notified, but they failed to do anything. Alexandra Allie Kemp was born on October 11, 1982 and grew up in Leawood, Kansas. where she lived with her parents and two brothers. At the age of 19, she completed her first year of college at Kansas State University and then returned home to Leawood. She had plans to work a summer job at the local Foxborough pool with her high school boyfriend, Phil Howes, and her brother, Tyler. She was also hoping to spend time with family and friends. On June 18, 2002, worked the early shift before Allie arrived for her afternoon shift. Tyler had agreed to take over around 5 p.m. so Allie could head home and get ready for a date she had planned with Phil. However, when Tyler arrived, Allie was nowhere to be found and the pool was left unattended. Allie's books that she had been reading were still on the table, as was her phone. Tyler knew his sister would never leave the pool unattended, and so after a short search, he called his father in a panic. Their father, Roger Kemp, quickly dropped what he was doing and rushed to the pool. When he arrived, Tyler was still looking for his sister. The two of them continued their search, checking more and more unlikely places. The last place they checked was the pump house, and it was there that he saw what looked like a human leg partially covered with a blue tarp. Roger pulled the tarp away and shockingly discovered his daughter's beaten body. He immediately called 911, and she was rushed to the hospital but would sadly not survive. The medical examiner found her body covered in bruises, and marks on her neck indicated that she had been strangled. Investigators began combing the scene, looking for any clues that might lead them to her killer. During their search, they found a small ointment cap, which they believed might have come from a first aid kit. News of her murder began to spread quickly, leading to a crowd at the scene. The police watched the crowd carefully, hoping to spot a nervous or suspicious person, but at the time, nothing came of it. With no options left, they began interviewing everyone that had a connection to Allie. While they interviewed her friends and family, one person really stuck out: her long-term boyfriend, Phil. The two were high school sweethearts, but cut off the relationship when Allie went off to college. However, when she returned for the summer, they started the relationship back up. Detectives quickly learned from Phil that Allie had attempted to contact him just a few hours before her body was discovered. He had a missed call and voicemail from her at 2:52 p.m. He tried to call her back once he saw the message, but she never picked up. As for Phil's movements, he had left his shift at the pool to work his second job before calling in to play video games at a friend's house. Both these activities were corroborated by the people Phil had claimed to be with. He first became aware of the situation when he received a call telling him Allie was in the hospital. Since Phil had a solid alibi, he was quickly ruled out, along with every member of Allie's close friends and family. At this point, investigators were at a loss, but all that would change when a frequent visitor to the pool came forward and told an interesting story. They said a week before the murder, they saw a person hiding in the bushes nearby holding a pair of binoculars. They also got a tip from a lawn crew working nearby who said they saw a beige Ford pickup truck on the day of the murder. They said the truck came and went multiple times that day, which they found strange. Word of the pickup truck began to spread around the small town and led to multiple tips from people claiming to have information on it. However, they were never able to identify it. Investigators would eventually get new information from one of Allie's friends, Laurel. She said that she arrived at the pool around 3:15 p.m. and wanted to surprise her. So, she sat in her car and continuously honked her horn, hoping to get a reaction from Allie, but she never did. Instead, she noticed a man walking out of the pump room. Thinking it was Allie's boss, she panicked and ducked down behind her dashboard. From her hiding place, she continued to watch the man as he walked casually away from the building, waved in her direction, climbed into his vehicle and drove off. Once he had left, Laurel went into the pool area to search for Allie, but left when there was no sign of her. She gave a description of the man, and a sketch artist was able to create a composite image. Thanks to her visit, detectives now had a time frame to work with. They already knew that Phil had received a missed call from Allie at 2:52 p.m., and now they had Laurel's visit placed at 3:15 p.m. That left a 23-minute window in which Allie was most likely attacked. After the sketch was released, multiple people began bringing in family photos of people they believed might be the killer. This eventually led them to James Strader, a mechanic who worked 20 minutes away in Olathe, Kansas, and had a striking resemblance to the man in the sketch. However, investigators would leave disappointed because James was working on the day of the murder, a fact that was confirmed by his boss. Investigators continued searching for a suspect, but in the meanwhile, a forensic team began testing the blood that was found on the small ointment cap. While most of the blood at the scene was linked to Ali, the blood found on the cap belonged to an unknown individual. They ran it through Cody's, but unfortunately, there were no matches found. 18 months into the investigation, the leads had basically dried up, so they decided to reach out to the local media. In January 2003, a mugshot appeared on a news broadcast showing a man who was suspected of sexually assaulting 3 women. Detectives on the case recognized the face immediately. It was the mechanic, James Strader, who was ruled out after providing an alibi. However, with this latest news in hand, they decided it was time to take another look. Most importantly, they needed to get a sample of his DNA. Investigators also wanted to bring James in for more questioning, but he eluded the police for 3 long weeks. He was finally apprehended after leaving a gas station in Utah without paying and was immediately pulled over by state police. After being brought in, he agreed that he resembled the sketch, but denied any involvement in the murder. Officers in Utah had also taken a sample of his DNA and uploaded it to the Cody's database, but strangely it wasn't a match and once again he was ruled out. After months had gone by with no suspect in sight, Bob Vesseler with Lamar Advertising decided to donate a billboard for free with information about the murder. After the billboard went up, investigators were given the name of Teddy Hoover by 2 separate people. Teddy resembled the composite image and owned a truck. He also maintained pools for a living but said he never worked on that particular pool. Teddy refused to submit his DNA for testing and asked to speak to his lawyer before agreeing to anything. Teddy's lawyer said he was concerned about his privacy and didn't want his DNA to sit in Cody's. So the officers presented him with a deal. They would test the DNA but would never upload it to the Cody's database. While waiting for Teddy to make a decision, detectives went back through their old notes and made a surprising discovery. Teddy had been at the scene on the day of the murder and had already spoken to detectives. Police notes showed his name listed amongst the bystanders interviewed at the pool. After 3 days of nothing, detectives called Teddy's lawyer, who informed them that his client had taken off. Months would go by with no signs of Teddy anywhere before they finally received an important tip in August 2004. The tip suggested that Teddy Hoover was actually Benjamin Appleby and he had fled to Connecticut. He had been living under the Hoover alias to avoid prosecution for a 1997 sex offense. Thankfully, when he was finally taken in, the Connecticut State Police took a sample of his DNA. However, he continued to deny his involvement. Investigators then decided to put him in the investigation room where they had 2 binders on the table bearing his names. There was also a pin board with his photograph and pictures from the crime scene. Eventually, he broke down crying and admitted to killing Ali. He recounted the events, saying he visited the pool as part of his maintenance work and Ali was there when he stepped into the pump house. Benjamin made a pass at Ali by attempting to touch her, but she pushed him away, causing him to lose control. He also said he planned to sexually assault her and had grabbed the ointment to use in the process, but was interrupted when Laurel began honking her horn. He said he collected himself, leaving calmly and giving her a friendly wave as he walked to his vehicle. The DNA results confirmed Benjamin's confession and he was arrested. However, when he entered the courtroom, he pleaded not guilty and claimed that his confession was coerced. He even accused the police of intimidation and threats against him and his family. However, DNA doesn't lie, so his attorney said he did kill her but claimed it wasn't premeditated. However, based on the evidence, the investigators knew this wasn't true. In the end, Appleby was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 50 years in jail. After the trial, Ali's parents organized Take Defense, the Ali Kemp Educational Foundation, a program that offers self-defense classes for women. Sadly, on April 4, 2022, Roger Kemp passed away at the age of 77. His sudden death left his friends and family devastated, and the Ali Kemp Educational Foundation released the following statement. Throughout the past 20 years, the foundation and the self-defense program have worked in conjunction to successfully train over 70,000 girls and women across the United States, ranging in age from 12 to 90 years. Perry was born on February 22, 1955, to parents Marvin and Jean in Linton, North Dakota. She and her high school sweetheart, Bruce Perry, graduated in 1973 and then married the next year on August 17, 1974. Arliss worked for a Christian youth group, taught Sunday school, and was described as trusting, joyful, and optimistic. Weeks after their marriage, they moved to Palo Alto, California to attend Stanford University. They moved into Quillen Hall in Escondido Village, a residence hall for married couples and partners with children. Bruce was now a second-year pre-med student who also maintained a job in order to support Arliss and himself. However, this caused Arliss to be alone most days, and she would even write friends and family back home saying she felt isolated because Bruce was so busy with school and work. Arliss then got a job as a receptionist at a nearby law firm, and this gave her the outlet she needed. She then began enjoying life in California and finally felt that things were falling into place. At 11:30 p.m. on October 12, 1974, Arliss had some letters she wanted to mail, and so she and Bruce left Quillen Hall and began walking. However, during their walk, they would get into an argument about their car's tire pressure. Arliss then told Bruce that she wanted to go to the church to unwind and have some alone time. After parting ways, Bruce returned home. At 11:50 p.m., Stephen Crawford, who worked security at the church, saw Arliss enter. Two other people in the church also saw Arliss enter, go to a pew, and kneel to pray. When they left, she was still praying. At about 12:10 a.m., Stephen entered the church but didn't see anyone. He announced that he was locking up but never received a response. Not long after, Bruce became concerned when Arliss didn't show back up. So he walked the half-mile to the church to look for her. However, when he arrived, all the doors were locked. He then decided to walk around campus searching for her. After being unable to find her, he returned home and waited until about 3 a.m. before reporting her missing. Bruce told authorities that she may have fallen asleep in the church. So they walked to the church and checked all the doors, but they were locked. They tried calling out to see if anyone was inside, but no one answered. A few hours later, the same security guard returned to the church to open it for the day. When Stephen entered the church, he found Arliss's deceased body and called it in saying, "Hey, we've got a stiff here." She was found lying partially nude on the front pew of the altar with her neck broken and her arms crossed over her chest with a candle in between. She had been beaten, strangled, sexually assaulted, and ultimately murdered with an ice pick. Investigators would also find a latent palm print on one of the candles near her body. It was later said that the crime scene resembled a satanic ritual. Strangely, when the cops arrived to question Bruce, they noticed he was covered in blood. He explained that he suffered from severe nosebleeds whenever he was stressed. Instead of telling Bruce the details of what they found, they asked him to come to the police station for questioning. They questioned him for 2 hours, creating various situations to elicit a reaction from him. For example, Arliss was cheating and he discovered it, or Arliss was pregnant and he was unhappy about it. Bruce voluntarily provided his prints for testing and took a polygraph examination. His prints didn't match the palm print found at the scene, and he passed the polygraph test and was no longer considered a suspect. That is, when they finally told him that his wife had been murdered. The FBI got involved and developed a profile of the murderer. They believed the killer was a loner with a military background between the ages of 17 and 22, and that he would collect possessions of his victims as souvenirs. It's also of note that Arliss was missing 2 objects from her possession. Investigators believe Arliss was still in the church with her killer when Stephen came to lock up. Someone passing by the church reported seeing a man with sandy blonde hair enter the church at the same moment Arliss did. Another passerby between 12:15 and 12:30 heard a strange sound coming from inside the church, and when they stopped, the noise also stopped. When Bruce called the police to report Arliss missing, Stephen said he did a sweep of the church around 2 a.m. and the police performed a sweep of the outside around 3 a.m. Strangely, both times, all the doors were found locked. Stephen was initially considered a suspect but was ruled out after he passed a polygraph test and his palm print didn't match the latent palm print found at the scene. There was some suspicion regarding the Stanford Chapel dean because he also had access to the church, but he passed a polygraph test as well. The handprint was compared to over 100 suspects, but no match was found. Sadly, the case would go unsolved for the next 4 decades. A co-worker of Arliss's at the law firm said that a man with sandy blonde hair and an athletic body had paid her a visit at work. The man and Arliss talked for about 15 minutes, and when Arliss returned, she appeared to be upset. Bruce was also asked about the man but stated he had no idea who the individual could have been. After Arliss' body was returned to Bismarck, North Dakota and buried, someone stole her temporary burial marker. This was strange because it was the only one stolen. This made people wonder if her killer was from Bismarck and had traveled to California to murder her. Part of Bruce's parents' job was to try and convert members of a satanic cult to Christianity. The cult was known as the Process Church of Final Judgment. They were into Scientology and Satanism and were known to perform rituals. 13 years later, in 1987, a book titled The Ultimate Evil, published by Marie Terry, reopened the entire satanic pentagram world once more. He was at odds with the police for dismissing Arliss and the Process Church of Final Judgment and claimed that the man Arliss was arguing with at work the day before she was murdered was a member of the Satanic Church. He further alleged that Arliss purposefully provoked an argument with Bruce to get some alone time with the man. The book became very popular, and he was even able to sell out a 1,000-seat capacity venue where he would sit and discuss the case's theories. In his book, he discusses a theory about her murderer possibly being the serial killer, the son of Sam. In 1978, 4 years after Arliss's murder, David Berkowitz wrote to Arliss's home in North Dakota, claiming that the Process Church of Final Judgment hired a hitman to kill her because she wanted to convert them to Christianity. He told them that the cult was nationwide and that they would kill individuals throughout the country. He knew this because he claimed to be a member himself. He stated that Charles Manson and serial killer Otis Toole were also members. Berkowitz then sent a book to a police officer in North Dakota in 1979, and in the book he wrote, Hunted, Stalked, and Slain followed to California, Stanford University. 2 officers from California flew to New York to question Berkowitz about the murder, and after about 30 minutes, he stopped talking and stated he didn't want the other convicts to think he was a snitch. So, the police considered him useless and moved on. Arliss's murder was eventually linked to the murders of 2 other women at Stanford University. People came forward to say they saw the same type of man with sandy blonde hair roaming the area around the time of those murders as well. The police even questioned Ted Bundy, who was frequently in California between 1973 and 1974. However, he was ruled out as a suspect since he had an alibi for the night of the murder. Finally, in 2016, the police received a break in the case. They discovered a DNA profile of a male downed on Arliss's jeans the night she was murdered. Police set out to interview everyone in the vicinity that night and collect DNA samples from each person. With that, they were able to eliminate everyone but the church's night guard, Stephen Crawford. Stephen Crawford, now 72 years old, was a veteran of the United States Air Force who began working as a police officer at Stanford University in the Department of Public Safety in 1971. However, in 1972, a new police chief decided to reorganize the department, and most of the police officers were offered jobs as security guards instead. Stephen despised this and began stealing items such as artworks and books, and eventually left Stanford in 1976. In 1992, his ex-wife reported him for creating a false diploma with a blank certificate obtained from Stanford. He was subsequently prosecuted and arrested for stealing thousands of dollars worth of various items from the university. In the end, he would receive a 6-month suspended sentence and 2 years of probation. In 1993, he relocated to San Jose, California, where he lived at the Dale Coronado apartment complex. He worked as an insurance adjuster and led a relatively quiet life. Even though his palm print didn't match the one found at the scene, and he passed the polygraph test, Crawford had remained a person of interest all those years. They compared his DNA to the DNA recovered on Arliss's jeans, and lo and behold, it was a match. On June 28, 2018, investigators visited Crawford's apartment at 9:05 a.m. Instead of letting them in, he shouted, asking them to wait while he got dressed. The police waited for a few minutes and then entered his apartment using the master key they got from the building manager. After entering, they saw Crawford seated on the bed with a handgun and backed away. After hearing a gunshot, they entered and discovered Crawford on the floor with a self-inflicted wound. Upon searching his apartment, they discovered a copy of Maury Terry's book, The Ultimate Evil, as well as a handwritten suicide note on his desk written in 2016, when investigators began to reinvestigate him. However, there was no mention of Arliss in the note. Unfortunately, this leaves us with some unanswered questions, such as, was the murder of Arliss part of his revenge against the university? Was she his only victim? Or was he a notorious serial killer who got away with murder for many years? Was the satanic ritual part of his MO or just a way to throw off the investigators? Sadly, we will probably never know the answers to these questions. Terry Ann Seebeck was born on March 31st, 1977 in Marion, Illinois. She grew up to be an artist, painting for a living, and eventually met Candace Majors, a Mount Carmel native born in 1981, and the two began a relationship. Candace and Terry were two single mothers living in West Frankfort, Illinois, and wanted to turn their lives around. They both had battled drug addictions but found sobriety with the support of each other. Finally, in 2007, the couple moved in together. Terry was working for her father's painting business while Candace was training to become a radiologist. Their lives finally seemed to be on the right track until one day tragedy struck them both. On October 19, 2009, Terry's aunt called 911 because Terry had missed work and no one could get in touch with her or Candace. Her aunt's on the house where the couple lived, and after arriving, she saw the front door covered in blood and decided to wait for the police to arrive. When police entered the home, they would shockingly find 28-year-old Candace and 32-year-old Terry's deceased bodies. An autopsy determined they were shot execution style by a small caliber handgun. Both of their credit cards and IDs were missing, as was Terry's Chevrolet Impala. However, there were no signs of a break-in and other valuables were left behind. In speaking with the women's friends, detectives learned of another couple, 19-year-old Afton Ferris and 29-year-old Michael Challert, who had been living with them for the past few weeks. Michael was born in 1979 and grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. He became a father at the age of 15, and by the time he was an adult, he was drifting around the Midwest, working odd jobs and moving from place to place. He met Terry in West Frankfort, and she allowed him to stay with her for a period of time. Michael returned to Cheyenne in 2008, where he met Afton, who was homeless at the time. She had grown up in foster care and could not hold down a job despite being valedictorian of her high school. Detectives then learned that Candace and Terry had accused Afton and Michael of stealing CDs, a tank top, and other things from them. After discovering this, they asked the couple to move out one day before the murders. Investigators wanted to question the couple, but they were nowhere to be found. They then learned that after being kicked out, they stayed with another friend. That friend told police that Afton and Michael left in the middle of the night and stole his .22 Ruger handgun. A day after the murder, Afton and Michael were named persons of interest. In speaking with Michael's family, they learned his friendship with Terry went back years. Because of this, they found it hard to believe he was behind such brutal acts of violence. During the investigation, officers obtained security camera footage from a local gas station that showed Michael filling up Terry's car and paying for it with Candace's credit card. Activity on Candace's credit card helped investigators track the couple over 1,000 miles away in Larimer County, Colorado. They learned Michael had a friend who lived in a trailer park in Fort Collins, Colorado, and that's where they would find Terry's car parked outside. They then found Afton and Michael and took them into custody. Upon entering the trailer, they found blood-stained clothing belonging to Afton, stolen credit cards, and a black purse containing the murder weapon. A handwritten poem titled Bullets and Weed was found inside Candace's car and signed by Afton. It read, "Seems like we got nowhere to run to and no way to go back. Guess the only way to go is to take this handful of bullets in a pocket full of weed." Another note found inside the car read, "We are sorry we did this. I wish we hadn't done this, but we had been pushed too far." Terry and Candace were thieves and liars, and they continuously stole from one another and blamed it on somebody else, and we continuously got the blame. In her interview with police, Afton admitted to stealing the murder weapon. She said they originally intended to rob Terry and Candace, but they decided to kill them when they got to their house, claiming that they didn't have any other choice. Afton said that in order to gain entrance into the home, Michael told the women he was there to apologize. But instead, after being let in, he gunned them down in cold blood. She said she saw Candace was attempting to escape, so she grabbed her and brought her back in while Michael shot her again. In his interview with police, Michael admitted to murdering the victims with Afton's help. He said he and Afton also planned to take their own lives as well. Following their confessions, Afton and Michael were both charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. Michael pleaded guilty to both counts and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Afton decided to go to trial, where she was found guilty of murder, home invasion, and armed robbery. She was also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Paige Johnson was born on August 28, 1993 in Edgewood, Kentucky. As a teen, she lived in Covington, Kentucky, and was described as outspoken, feisty, and kind. During high school, 16-year-old Paige gave birth to a baby girl and ultimately quit school to care for her new daughter. On September 22, 2010, a few weeks after turning 17, Paige wanted to go out and have some fun. She made plans to go to a house party with 22-year-old Jacob Bumpass. She also made plans to end up at her sister Brittany's house, but she left her cell phone at home and told her sister she would call from a different number to update her on her plans. Brittany kept waiting for Paige to call, but that call never came. She wasn't concerned until Brittany failed to return home the following day. She called her mother Donna Johnson to ask if she'd seen Paige, but she hadn't either. At that point, the family decided to report her missing. When officers initially took the case, they believed that Paige was either still partying somewhere or was just another teen runaway. The police assumed she would return in a couple of days, so they didn't initially take action. Paige's family stayed adamant that Paige was a devoted mother who would have never abandoned her daughter. Since the police weren't being very helpful, the family decided to search for her themselves. They posted flyers, formed search parties, and talked to every person Paige knew, including Jacob, the boy she was with the night she disappeared. Paige's family questioned Jacob about that night, and he told them that he dropped her off at Brittany's house around 1 a.m. and left without looking back. He then initially lied about giving her alcohol, but later admitted to giving her beer. After talking with Paige's family, he quickly lawyered up and stopped cooperating. He stopped participating in searches and never answered another question. A few days after her disappearance, the police finally began their investigation by requesting tips from the public. They then quickly turned their attention to Jacob. He then gave them the same BS story and wouldn't cooperate any further. The police then decided to look at Jacob's cell phone data and noticed his story didn't match. He reportedly dropped Paige off near Brittany's house at 1 a.m. at 15th Street and Scott Street in Covington, but his phone records showed him elsewhere. And at about 4 a.m., his phone pinged near East Fork Lake, about 25 miles away. From that lake, Jacob posted a couple of random updates on Facebook talking about his insomnia and love for fishing. This was strange because Jacob had never posted comments like this before and never did again. The timing was also odd, and it seemed like he was trying to create an alibi. The police then decided to search the lake, but it was over 4,000 acres. They spent weeks looking for Paige or any clue related to the case, but they ended up empty-handed. In 2011, Paige was declared legally dead, allowing her family to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Jacob. However, in court, Jacob kept pleading the fifth, and when asked to take a polygraph test, he refused. It would be another 10 years before the family would finally have some long-awaited answers. During this time, the family kept hearing rumors about Paige being passed out at a party. Multiple people at the party recalled seeing Jacob and another young man carry her out. Finally, in March 2020, almost 10 years after Paige went missing, a married couple who were out deer hunting near the East Fork Lake found some burned human remains. They were found in a wooded area off Mathis Road in Claremont County, Ohio. The police quickly sent a search team and unearthed the remains located 45 minutes from Page's home in Florence. Because so much time had passed, dental records were used to confirm the remains belonged to Page. The body was found about 2 miles away from their initial search radius. Interestingly, it was only a mile from where Jacob's phone pinged on the night of her disappearance. Unfortunately, they were unable to get enough conclusive evidence due to the body's decomposition to charge Jacob with murder. Instead, they charged him with abuse of a corpse and tampering with evidence. In June 2020, he was indicted but pleaded not guilty. He was released on bond and is currently awaiting trial with the next hearing scheduled for July 2023. At this point, the prosecution may never be able to prove foul play, but they are hopeful they can at least convict Jacob for actively hiding her deceased body. While there are theories about what might have happened to Page, including drug overdose and sexual assault, the prosecution claims they may never prove foul play. The body had decomposed beyond recognition, and there was insufficient evidence to charge someone with homicide. But the police are confident of one thing. Page died on Jacob's watch, and he actively concealed the facts. Noma Stamey Cobb was born on November 16, 1962 in Lincoln County, North Carolina. At the age of 29, Nona was a widow with a 3-year-old son named Josh, but due to her struggles with substance abuse, Nona's sister was granted custody of Josh. On July 7, 1992, at 6:15 a.m., Nona was found strangled to death on the northbound side of Interstate 77 near Elkin in Surry County, North Carolina. She was last seen the night before getting into a truck driven by an unidentified man at the Welcome Center on Interstate 85 in Cleveland County. Unfortunately, with very few leads to go on, the case would go unsolved for the next 30 years. About 3 years into the case, investigators suspected the killer might be a truck driver by the name of Sean Patrick Goebel. Goebel had confessed to the murders of Brenda Hadji, Sherry Monger, and Alice Haynes. Goebel of Asheboro, North Carolina targeted sex workers and transported them over state lines before dumping their bodies on different interstates in multiple states. Investigators looked into dozens of murders across several states that matched Goebel's pattern, including Nona's. However, in 1995, they were able to rule him out as a suspect when his DNA didn't match the DNA found on Nona's body. 26 years later, in 2021, investigators got a break in the case after providing DNA found on the victim to Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick with Identifiers International. With the use of genetic genealogy, investigators finally had a suspect, 71-year-old Warren Luther Alexander of Diamond Head, Mississippi. On March 27, 2022, Alexander was extradited back to North Carolina and officially charged with Nona's murder. Timothy Patrick McNamara was born on December 10, 1948, and would later have a son and daughter named Jennifer Roston Clark and Caleb McNamara. In 2012, Mac, as he was known by, was a hardworking farm operator now in his 60s. He would strike up a relationship with 40-year-old Tracy Nessel. Mac loved his family, raised his children, and built a legacy on his 84-acre apple orchard. He was also going through his third divorce in July 2012 when he met Nestle, who was living in North Carolina but was visiting her grandparents in Soap Lake, Washington. But here's the crazy part. Nestle was actually the biological daughter of Mac's brother, making her his niece, although her father was never in her life. The couple would keep this fact a secret from the people that didn't know. Nestle said she didn't care that Mac was her biological uncle, and didn't know the McNamaras very well, but said that she and Mac's souls were connected. Nestle said that, as a child, she was never accepted by the McNamaras because she was an illegitimate child who was rejected by her father. Just months into the relationship, Mac began dating Nestle over $1 million worth of property, paid off all of her debts on her former home in Hope Mills, North Carolina, named her on his life insurance policy, and made her the sole beneficiary in his will. A year later, believing family and friends would never accept their romantic relationship, Nessel and Mac left Washington State in early 2013 and moved to Belize to begin a new life together. Mac leased out his Soap Lake farm, and with a $240,000 insurance payout he received from a failed crop, he bought a new farm in Belize. The couple then began building a bed and breakfast on the property located in Boston Village off the Old Northern Highway, and then got married. Nessel said Mac insisted on the marriage and wanted her to have his last name. By 2014, a year or so into their marriage, the couple's relationship had soured and Mac discovered that Nessel had had an affair. According to the family, Mac had begun to distrust his wife. He expressed concern over his safety, Nessel's faithfulness, and his decision to pass his entire estate to her. In October 2014, Nessel purchased a 9mm pistol in North Carolina and had it shipped to Belize and licensed the firearm on December 2nd of that year. Meanwhile, Mac and his children began exchanging emails again. In one of them, Caleb suggested his father consider selling the Soap Lake farm to alleviate the financial pressure, but he rejected the idea. In fact, Mac had quick claimed the property to Nestle in December 2012, shortly after their romance began. On Christmas Day 2014, just days before his life insurance was set to expire, 66-year-old Mac was found on their home's porch by Nestle, dead of a gunshot wound to the back of the head. Nestle claims that when she found him, he was on his side, so she laid down next to him and began spooning him with a blanket over both of them to keep him warm. The death was originally called a suicide, but then Nessel claims the lead officer of the Belizean police told her Mac owed him money, and when she declined to pay him, the case was turned into a homicide. Some reports state that Nessel claimed Mac walked outside with the gun, as he usually did in case he encountered an animal, and she soon heard a gunshot. Other reports state that she told police that she and her husband had a misunderstanding over money, and when she left him outside, he took his own life, but the locals and investigators disagreed. Orlando Vera, a forensics analyst at the National Forensic Service, found that the absence of scratches and damage to both the front and rear sides of the weapon indicates that the firearm did not fall from a height, but was rather placed where it was found. Vera also found that blood on the front, back, and top of the right sleeve of the blouse that Nessa was wearing indicated that the blouse was close at the time he was shot. Pictures taken and analyzed by Robert Henry, crime scene specialist, on the night of Mac's death revealed that no blood was seen on the hands of the victim, indicating that his hands were never holding the firearm. Blood on the back of his shirt and the gun indicated a blowback effect. Henry concluded that Mac was not the one who fired the shot from the 9mm that Nestle purchased a few weeks earlier. He said that Mac was in a standing position at the time of the shooting and that the gun may have been placed in the area it was found at the time the scene was being processed. John Rudin, forensic analyst attached to the firearm unit, documented a post-mortem examination on Mac. He concluded that the position of the entry wound would be extremely uncomfortable for the victim to have fired himself. He also said the trajectory of the bullet and a lack of gunpowder on Mac's hands proved he didn't shoot himself. By the time Nestle became an official suspect, she had already left the country and returned to Soap Lake, Washington 2 days after the incident. After the murder, Belize police put out a warrant for Nestle's arrest, but could not pursue the matter any further since it required the U.S. to allow for extradition and the FBI had no jurisdiction. She has never been extradited in this case. This led Mac's children to file a civil murder suit in Washington in 2015, claiming that Nessel had seduced, murdered, and deceived their father for financial gain. They filed the lawsuit under Washington Slayer statute, which states that a person may not benefit from a property if they had killed a person to get it. It would be 10 years before trial would begin, accusing Tracy of murdering her husband. Mac's daughter, Jennifer, traveled to Belize multiple times to obtain evidence from authorities. The trial began on March 7, 2022, and the jury announced its verdict in favor of criminal murder by the defendant Tracy Nessel, but she would remain a free woman. Although the couple got married in Belize, the marriage was later voided when the government learned of the couple's biological relationship. In the end, she was found civilly liable for his death, and the jury awarded Max's adult children $3.3 million in damages to be paid by Nestle on the conclusion that she had willfully committed battery against their father and caused his death. So while Nestle remains a free woman, she must pay the family every dollar they say she had taken from their father. Haley Darlene Dunn was born on August 28, 1997, and lived in Colorado City, Texas. Her parents separated when she was 10 years old, and she and her brother David went to live with their mother, Billy, and her mother's boyfriend, Sean Atkins, on Chestnut Street in Colorado City. Haley and her dad, Clint Dunn, were especially close, and since Clint lived only a short walk away from where Haley lived, she would visit his house every day. At the age of 13, she was an 8th grader at Colorado Middle School, where she was involved in basketball, softball, volleyball, and cheerleading, and played the saxophone in the band. Her father described her as lovable, bubbly, caring, and a tomboy who liked pretty things. On December 26, 2010, Haley's brother spent the night with a friend, and Haley stayed home playing video games until midnight. Early the next morning, Atkins and Billy left for work, leaving Haley asleep in her bed. Atkins would arrive at his job at around 6 a.m. He would then get into an argument with his boss and then quit his job soon after. Atkins would pick Billy up from work that evening, and when they arrived back at the house, Haley was not home. Atkins told her that his boss had fired him that morning. He said that when he arrived home at 3 p.m., he spoke with Haley, who said she was heading to her father's house, and then to her friend Mary Beth's home for a sleepover, and would be back the next day. Billy took Atkins at his word and carried on with her evening as normal. By the next afternoon, when Haley had not returned, her mother called Mary Beth's home. To Billy's surprise, they had no knowledge of Haley having any plans to stay the previous night. She also found out that Haley had never visited her father either. Billy found Haley's toothbrush and clothes still in the home, items you would have most likely taken with you for a sleepover. Billy then reported her daughter missing. Haley's father, Clint, became relentless in trying to find his daughter, but as the search for Haley progressed, the reporters and locals noticed that Billy wasn't participating. Shockingly, just 4 days after Haley was reported missing, Atkins and Billy threw a New Year's Eve party. However, Billy would say that she didn't realize it was New Year's Eve and that the family had just come over to support her. It soon became apparent that Haley and her brother's home lives were way more difficult behind closed doors than anyone realized. Billy and Atkins had a toxic relationship. Haley's grandmother told the media that Haley was terrified of Atkins. She said he was creepy and would stand in the doorway of her room at night and watch her. An affidavit would say that Atkins had previously threatened Billy and Haley's life in February of 2010. It also came to light that Atkins had not been fired from his job after all. According to his boss, he arrived at work at 6 a.m. on December 27th, purchased a Dr. Pepper, handed in his overalls, and quit within 10 minutes of arriving. He claimed that after leaving work, he went straight to his mother's house in Big Spring and applied for unemployment benefits on her computer. He claimed to have driven home at 2:40 p.m., but his cell phone data revealed otherwise. Cell phone pings placed him in Colorado City between 6:35 and 6:56 a.m. and in Big Spring from 9:38 a.m. to 2:40 p.m., 30 miles from home. Her father, Clint, would join forces with a private investigator in August 2018. In a 2011 television interview, Atkins denied involvement in Haley's disappearance and described the days she went missing. He said he drove to work, quit his job, turned in his belongings, and didn't speak to anyone at work. He said he drove to his mother's house, where he researched online to see if he could qualify for unemployment, and then went home that afternoon at about 3 p.m. He claimed that when he arrived home, Haley was watching TV in the living room, and so he went to the bedroom he shared with Billy. He said that she came in there, told him she was going to her father's house, and then would be staying the night with a friend, and then she left. He said about an hour later, Billy's son David and a friend came home, went to David's room and played video games. He then went to pick up Billy from work at the Snyder Hospital at 6 p.m., and the couple returned home and then went to bed shortly after that. He begged Haley to come home during the televised interview and said he had nothing to do with her disappearance and loved her. Both Billy and Atkins would later fail a lie detector test regarding Haley's whereabouts. Authorities and community members searched landfills, fields, and wooded areas, but they were never able to find any signs of Haley. Over 2 years later, on March 16, 2013, Haley's body was found by someone rock hunting on property owned by the Atkins family in Scurry County near Lake J.B. Thomas, about 30 miles from their home. It would be nearly 6 weeks before the remains were officially identified as belonging to Haley, and it would be almost 4 years before she could finally be laid to rest after being released to her mother. 7 years later, in 2020, Haley's biological father had undergone so much stress regarding his daughter's murder that he began to have heart attacks. He was also stalked and harassed by a man, was threatened numerous times, and was unfairly treated by people, including local law enforcement in Big Springs, Texas, who allegedly tried to cover up and protect Atkins. At some point, the FBI took over the case from the local police. The home she disappeared from was demolished for unknown reasons, and the couple moved to Austin, Texas, but have since broken up. Then in 2021, nearly 11 years after her murder, Atkins was finally arrested by Texas Rangers and indicted on murder and tampering with evidence by intentionally and knowingly concealing a human corpse. The indictments came down on December 30th, 2021, and show he is accused of striking Haley in the head with an unknown object, causing her death on December 26, 2010, the day before she had supposedly left the home. While it was reported that a DNA sample led to the arrest, authorities have remained tight-lipped about any other details in the case. Witness accounts would say that Atkins was fascinated by horror slasher films, and it is reported that he is a collector of movie memorabilia connected to the Halloween movie series. During the investigation, authorities confiscated 278 pages of material printed off a computer about several lurid topics the couple described as a hobby. Officers found the materials in a box in the bedroom shared by Billy and Atkins, which was printed at their jobs. The material included 23 pages related to serial killer Edmund Kemp. 18 pages were related to George Emil Banks, who killed 5 of his own children and went on a broader killing spree. Another 13 pages were printed about Robert Leroy Anderson, a serial killer and sadist. 37 pages were related to Robert Picton, a Canadian pig farmer, about mass murder, and as many as 23 missing Vancouver women. Other material in the box included a photo of a pentagram and information about vampires and the occult. 15 pages were related to Alton Coleman and Deborah Brown, a pair of killers in which Brown was painted as a good girl gone bad and incorporated crude topics. Another 19 pages printed on the same day were related to the princes in the tower, the Henry VIII murders, and the murder of family members who were prepubertal and premeditated suffocation in bed. Other material included multiple pages associated with the rap group Insane Clown Posse. Allegedly, they also found in their possession were homemade explicit videos. Additionally, authorities discovered over 100,000 inappropriate pictures of minors and animals on a memory stick in Billy's home and a computer in Atkins' mother's house. It appeared clear to authorities that Atkins and Billy were fixated on slasher movies and obsessed with serial killers. One of Haley's uncles told police that after she disappeared, he asked Atkins how anyone could hurt a teenager, to which Atkins responded, "It's like killing a deer." Before Billy and Atkins split, Haley's brother David was removed from the home by Child Protective Services. 3 months later, authorities arrived at their house with the arrest warrant for Atkins, but Billy claimed he wasn't there. Upon searching the home, they found Atkins hiding, and Billy was sentenced to a year probation for lying. Clint believes his ex-wife and Atkins were both responsible for his daughter's murder. Atkins also has a history of stalking multiple women and sexually assaulting at least 2 in Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico, where he spent some time. Since they were separated when Atkins was arrested, Billy said she didn't find out about the arrest from law enforcement, but instead from the internet, and was happy about the outcome. She said, "I'm not really shocked at the news that it was Sean. Of course, you would have hoped it wasn't him because I stayed with him after she left after Haley went missing. But I'm not surprised, and I thank God that person has been apprehended and will pay for what he did here on Earth." Billy admitted they both failed lie detector test, but said any allegations that she knew what happened to her daughter were absolutely false. Karen Swift was a 1985 graduate of Walnut Ridge High School in Walnut Ridge, Arkansas. She would later become a mother of 4 and lived with her family in Dyersburg, Tennessee. Her close friends described her as a lot of fun, witty, and strong-willed, except for when it came to her husband, David Swift, who they said always told her what to do. In October 2011, 44-year-old Karen filed for divorce from David. The couple had a very tumultuous relationship and had both been known to step outside of the marriage. However, despite their unsteady past, there were never any known signs of domestic violence. 3 weeks after the filing, on the night of October 29, 2011, Karen attended a Halloween party at the Farms Golf Club and left sometime after 1 a.m. to pick up her daughter, who wasn't feeling well, from another party. Upon arriving home, Karen lay down with her daughter for about 30 minutes before carrying her into her other daughter's room and leaving them in bed together. The oldest daughter remembers looking at the clock and seeing it was about 3 a.m. This was sadly the last time the girls would see their mother alive. The next morning, her 2004 Nissan Murano was found with a flat tire on the side of the road half a mile from her home. 9 weeks later, her remains were found by hunters underneath kudzu bushes in the Bledsoe Cemetery near her home, not far from where her car had been abandoned. The autopsy report states that Karen died of blunt force trauma to the head. She was also partially clothed and had other injuries at the time of her death. Initially, when Karen was considered missing, the Dyer County Sheriff's Department and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations worked the case together. But as soon as it became a homicide investigation, Dyer County took full jurisdiction over the case. Dyer County would claim that a lot of their time spent was dispelling false information and rumors with nothing leading to an arrest in Karen's murder. But witnesses who came forward with information have indicated that they attempted to give statements to the Sheriff's Department only for their eyewitness accounts to be downplayed or dismissed as false. However, Dyer County did release several statements to the public that pointed to David being the prime suspect. Allegedly, Karen had met a man who gave her 10 grand to help her leave her husband before she was murdered. At one point, some people were saying that Karen paid a high price for her extramarital affairs, and the detectives on the case seemed to want to turn a blind eye because some of the men were prominent figures in the community. Ultimately, 11 years after her murder, her husband, David Swift, was indicted of premeditated first-degree murder in the death of Karen. By that time, Swift had moved to Alabama and remarried and was extradited back to Dyer County. However, as you'll know, small towns talk and rumors spiral out of control. And in the end, her divorce filings would be what led to her murder. Dr. Lee Big Twee was born in France and worked at the Hospital of Lions before receiving a job at the National Institutes of Health in Maryland. After relocating to the States, she would change jobs and began working at the Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C. At the age of 42, Dr. T was a molecular research biologist living alone in a one-story home in the 1600 block of Martha Terrace in Rockford, Maryland. One of her projects at the medical center involved pediatric pulmonary medicine. Lee was well-liked and described as a wonderful, enthusiastic person. She was also a cello player who performed with the Montgomery College Symphony Orchestra. She was always deeply immersed in her work and was said to never take time off. In early October 1994, Lee exited the Twinbrook metro station and started her walk home. She sadly never made it because someone dragged her into a yard near her home and brutally attacked her. She was beaten and strangled to death. She had also been indecently assaulted and was not discovered for a few days because her body naturally sunk into some English ivy, making it very hard to see her. A leather satchel was found next to her body, ruling out robbery as a possible motive. DNA recovered from the crime scene would later lead detectives to her killer. In 2017, that DNA was sent in for DNA phenotyping, and it was determined that the suspect was white, likely with blue eyes and no freckles, and had a distinctive shape to his head. In 2018, images were released of how the man would have roughly appeared at ages 25 and 45. That DNA also linked to another case dating back to 1989, 5 years before Lee was killed, and involved a woman who was indecently assaulted after she, too, exited the Twinbrook station and headed home. On June 25, 1989, at about 10:15 p.m., a 52-year-old woman was walking on Lewis Avenue when a man approached her from behind, dragged her into a yard, and assaulted her. 5 years later, on September 19, 1994, at about 10:20 p.m., a 25-year-old woman was walking on Twinbrook Parkway when a man approached her from behind, armed with a knife. He dragged her to the side of her residence and tried to assault her. She resisted, fled, and contacted the police. Investigators didn't have any DNA from this crime, but it still had the common denominator: a victim who had just left the station walking and attacked near her home. Parabon Nanolabs cross-referenced the DNA with DNA samples housed on the genealogy website GeneMatch. Finally, in 2019, using genetic genealogy research, her killer was identified as Kenneth Earl Day. But Day died in 2017 at the age of 52 in Upshur County, West Virginia. Multiple mugshots were released of Day, showing he had a criminal history, but the nature of those crimes is unknown. He moved from Montgomery County around 1997, according to police, and worked as a carpenter in various areas of Maryland and West Virginia. Officials say Day could be a suspect in other unsolved cases in Montgomery County and believe he has likely attacked more women. Here are the prior known addresses for Kenneth Earl Day in Maryland, Virginia, and West Virginia with approximate dates. If a man attacked you in these areas from 1989 to the late 2000s, pause the screen and take a look. On August 11, 1994, 59-year-old Francisco Santilli arrived at the home he shared with his girlfriend, 28-year-old Concepcion Villa, who went by Connie, and their 3-year-old son Dante Santilli. The home was located on Garden Gateway in El Paso, Texas. As Francisco entered the home, he was surprised to find an intruder in the hallway. The intruder immediately stabbed him and then fled the scene, taking with him some clothes, jewelry, and the family's 1994 Dodge Colt, which he had found in the garage. Francisco made his way to the bedroom where he would find Connie's body. The intruder had broken into their home sometime after midnight and had stabbed Connie and their son, Dante. Sadly, all 3 victims would succumb to their injuries. Shortly after the killings, the family's car was found in El Paso, more than a dozen miles away from home. Investigators recovered evidence from the crime scene, but with limited technology, they couldn't develop any workable leads. Finally, in 2015, with advancements in technology, investigators were able to reopen the case and identify Arturo Ortega Garcia as a suspect. A warrant was then issued for his arrest, but it would take 5 years to capture him. In 2020, over 26 years after the triple homicide, U.S. Marshals and the Solitary Star outlaw team located and arrested 69-year-old Garcia in Mexico City. He was then extradited to the U.S. for arraignment and given a $5 million bond. Investigators have not disclosed the advancements that led to the suspect's identification, which I assume was genetic genealogy. They also haven't given a possible motive for the killings and what ties, if any, Garcia had to the family. Kim Everett Kirk was born January 12, 1970, and was one of 3 daughters. She met David Neal Cox through a friend at work around the year 2000, and initially he was a nice guy. They quickly married, and he became a stepfather to Kim's 2 daughters, and the couple went on to have 2 sons together. Cox was a truck driver, but following a back injury and a prescription for painkillers, he left the workforce and qualified for disability. He then became addicted to meth and started abusing Kim. Due to the drugs, his behavior and personality had suddenly changed. At some point, Cox had even gone as far as manufacturing his own meth. In 2009, when her daughter Lindsay confessed to her mother that Cox had been sexually assaulting her for a few years, Kim finally decided to divorce him. But this instilled fear into Kim, and she made plans for her and the kids to take refuge at a women's shelter out of fear that Cox would retaliate. Kim took the children and left and pressed charges against Cox, and when deputies arrived to the home, Cox was arrested for statutory rape, sexual battery, and child abuse. They also found the precursors to make meth. Kim, still deathly afraid of her estranged husband, moved her and the children in with her sister, Christy Simon. While in the county jail, he told other prisoners that if he ever got out, he would kill his wife. However, unable to raise bond money, he remained in jail for 9 months. During that time, he often made threatening phone calls and would tell her he was coming for her. Suddenly, in April 2010, his bond was significantly reduced, allowing him to raise enough funds to get out. The family only learned he had been released when a friend saw him on the street and called Kim. She then went to the Chancery Court and got protective orders against him in Lee, Pontotoc, and Union counties. Now that he was out, He would sometimes drive by her home and point his finger at her and simulate a gun. Then about 7 p.m. on May 14, 2010, tragedy would strike. 12-year-old Lindsay was sitting on the couch while her mom's sister, Christy, was cooking dinner and one of her brothers was playing basketball outside. Her mother, Kim, was in the back of the house preparing a bath for her youngest son. That's when Cox shot through the screen door of the home in Sherman, Mississippi, before barging inside and ordering Lindsay not to move. He then chased her aunt out of the house. He then found Kim and shot her twice. Her youngest son would frantically run to a closet. Meanwhile, Aunt Christy called Kim's parents and told them what was happening. Cox called her parents and told them it was all their fault he was arrested and he had planned to kill all of them. Kim's father and stepmother, Benny and Melody Kirk, then had to serve as negotiators on the phone with Cox. They could hear Cox taunting Kim as she was dying and belittling her and said he wanted to sit there and watch her suffer. Kim was able to talk on the phone briefly to her father while she lay on the floor bleeding to death and said, "Daddy, I'm dying." She was still hanging on to life at midnight. He had barricaded the four of them inside the home and physically and mentally tortured the family and told law enforcement he planned to kill the children and then himself. When he stopped talking to law enforcement at 3:23 a.m., officers stormed the house and arrested him. Kim was sadly already deceased during those nearly 9 hours of holding the children hostage. Cox sexually assaulted his stepdaughter, Lindsay, 3 times in front of her dying mother, even as police surrounded the home. 2 years later, he pleaded guilty to capital murder, kidnapping, and several other felonies related to the standoff and was sentenced to death. He then began years of appealing his conviction and sentence. He then made plans to waive his appeals and proceed with the execution, which infuriated Lindsay as she wanted him to sit in prison and reflect on what he did to her and her family. Lindsay has allowed her name to be made public to tell her story. On November 17, 2021, 50-year-old Cox died by lethal injection at the Mississippi State Penitentiary, and Lindsay, now 23, was there to witness it. He became the first Mississippi inmate to be put to death in 9 years. In the days prior to his scheduled execution, Cox made a shocking confession. He said that he had been the one that killed his sister-in-law, Felicia Cox, who was married to his brother. On November 19th, 2 days after his execution, his attorneys hand-delivered a letter in which Cox confessed to the murder and gave details of where her body is located. Felicia had been missing since July 2, 2007, after making a visit to Kim and David Cox's home. Her remains were found where he said they'd be in Pontotoc County on his family's former property. He had been a person of interest in Felicia's disappearance, but authorities had no evidence at the time. Kim's father and stepmother raised Lindsay and her 2 younger brothers after Kim's death, and one of his sons still has fear that he will come after them, even knowing that he is no longer breathing the air that he didn't deserve. Anna Mariah Wilson was born on May 18, 1996 in Littleton, New Hampshire, to Eric and Karen Wilson. She grew up in Kirby, Vermont, and went by Mo and was a gifted multi-sport athlete. She was the captain of her high school soccer team and was a nationally ranked junior skier, placing 3rd in the 2013 U.S. Junior National Championship downhill event. After college, she transitioned from skiing to biking, and at the age of 25, she was a professional bike racer and worked as a demand planner for Specialized. She enjoyed cooking, riding, and traveling, especially to Italy. She recently excelled at gravel racing, a relatively new category of cycling that some consider a hybrid of road cycling and mountain biking. On May 10, 2022, a profile in Bello News referred to her as the winningest woman in the American off-road scene. The next day, May 11, 2022, was preparing to compete in the 157-mile gravel low-coast bike race in Texas. She was staying with a friend in Austin, Texas, while preparing for the upcoming race in Hico. She told her friend she was going for an afternoon swim, but she didn't go along. Cyclist Colin Strickland joined her and the two would have dinner together afterwards. Colin would then drop Mo back at her friend's house. That's where the story takes a horrible turn. Colin's girlfriend, 35-year-old Caitlin Marie Armstrong, was apparently jealous of Mo and Colin's relationship. Armstrong had even confronted Mo before and told her to stay away from Colin. After Colin dropped Mo off, Armstrong would allegedly shoot Mo to death inside of her friend's home. Armstrong had been suspicious of Colin cheating on her with Mo for several months. However, Colin told police that he and Mo were only briefly romantically involved in the fall of 2021, but only while he and Armstrong were temporarily broken up. He said after that, Mo and him remained friends and their relationship became completely platonic and professional. Her loved one said, had no reason to believe that she was romantically involved with anyone when she was killed. 6 days after the murder, police issued a homicide warrant for Armstrong. Following Mo's killing, police located 2 handguns in the home Colin shared with Armstrong, which matched the spent shell casing found at the murder scene. Armstrong's car was also seen on surveillance camera near the crime scene prior to the shooting. Somehow, Armstrong was able to obtain a fraudulent passport and would use this to flee the country. She would fly from Texas to New York and then fly from the New York International Airport to Costa Rica. She was on the run for 43 days until she was found and arrested on June 29, 2022 at a hostel on Santa Teresa Beach in Costa Rica. Investigators discovered that before she fled Austin, Texas, she sold her Jeep Grand Cherokee to a CarMax dealership. Also, while Armstrong was on the run, she cut her hair and dyed it dark brown and wore a bandage on her nose, claiming she had a surfboarding accident. Colin states that he has a lot of regret and torture knowing that this horrible crime was so close to him. As of June 30, 2022, she is being detained in Costa Rica on an immigration violation until she is deported back to Texas to face murder charges and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Michelle Koski was born in 1973 and was said to love animals and enjoyed playing Super Mario Bros. At the age of 17, she was still in high school and living in Seattle, Lake Washington in the 13,300 block of 30th Avenue Northeast, with her 28-year-old boyfriend. She had plans to attend college the next fall and was working at Taco Bell. On August 18, 1990, she called her mother Violet Simonson and agreed to come back home and stay at her and her stepfather's house to take care of the dog while her mother and stepfather went on a trip out of town. Before going to her parents' house, she visited an apartment earlier in the day in the 6200 block of 14th Avenue, Northwest Seattle, and then was given a ride back to her apartment. At some point, though, she was given a ride to an area in Snohomish County where teens were known to hang out, drink, and ride motorcycles. While there, things would take a terrible turn and she would end up missing. A week later, on August 25, 1990, a woman walking her dog near Echo Lake Road and Highway 522 stumbled upon a female's lifeless body. The finding was in Snohomish, Washington, not far from where Michelle went missing. It was determined that the body belonged to Michelle and she had tragically been sexually assaulted and murdered. Investigators said that whoever committed the crime used pieces of concrete from a nearby pile to finish her off. Her live-in boyfriend was initially a person of interest but would ultimately be ruled out as a suspect. Around the time Michelle's body was found, the Green River Killer had been terrorizing the Seattle area for about a decade, and Seattle investigators considered a serial killer to be a possibility. But sadly, with no concrete evidence pointing at anyone, the case would go cold for the next 3 decades. In 2005, a cold case team reopened her case, and over the next 10 years, they would comb through several possible suspects, but they were all ruled out by DNA comparison. In 2012, the detective on the case stated that what likely happened was the person probably intended to have sex with her, but she didn't want to, and when she tried to flee, he ran her down and strangled her. In 2021, Parabon Nanolabs would take the DNA sample, but their process would be extended because they had to deconvolute the DNA sample because it contained the DNA from both the suspect and victim, which makes it a tedious and challenging process. Then, genetic genealogist Deb Stone spent about 9 more months building a family tree and entering her findings into public genealogy websites, including Family Tree DNA and GeneMatch. From her home in Oregon, she then found 2 likely suspects, which were 2 brothers, and these names were provided to the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office to finish the investigation to determine which one was the likely killer. State and county crime labs compared the crime scene samples to one of the brothers, revealing they were the same person and the DNA was a match. 32 years after her murder, On June 30th, 2022, the sheriff's office announced they had identified the killer as Robert Anthony Brooks. Authorities say Brooks was 23 at the time and had been released from prison 4 months before the murder and was living with a relative only a few blocks from Michelle. Authorities did not say for what he was previously convicted of, but it was reportedly a juvenile conviction. During his life, he was never on detectives' radar in her case, and it's unclear how and when she crossed paths with Brooks. But this waste of space wouldn't face justice for Michelle's senseless murder because he died of natural causes at the age of 48 in King County, Washington in 2016. Michelle's mother told TV news crews she was grateful there would be no trial and said other families waiting for answers should take this case to heart and wait for the technology as it's getting better every day, and pretty soon none of those bad guys will be able to hide. In August 2019, employees of McKnight Tire in Columbia, Missouri found a small backpack hidden inside of a tire along the tree line at the edge of the store's parking lot. Upon checking it, they made a gruesome discovery. In the backpack was the decomposing remains of a full-term female infant, which was mostly bones. Due to the state of decomposition, the initial autopsy was unable to determine the cause of death or how long the child may have been there. The Columbia Police Department investigated many leads over the next few years, but were unable to determine what happened to the infant and who her parents were. In September of 2020, Columbia Police Department partnered with Othram to use advanced DNA testing to develop new leads that might help identify the infant. A DNA Solves crowdfund was established to cover the cost of testing for the case. Othram was able to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the infant. Meanwhile, on June 14, 2022, a letter that had been found years earlier in a wallet hidden behind a drawer at a local Super 8 hotel was released to authorities. When it was first discovered in 2019, the hotel employee didn't know the significance of the disturbing letter. It was then placed in a drawer in Lost and Found, where it remained until news of the discovery of the remains hit the news. It appeared to have been written by the mother of the infant and was intended for the police department. By calling the police and alerting them to the letter, the hotel employee really helped the case despite holding on to it for years. A genetic genealogist built a family tree based on the DNA and was able to give law enforcement a possible identification of the baby and her parents. On June 28, 2022, the Columbia Police Department announced that the baby had been identified as Simone J. Daniels. She was 4 to 5 months old when she died at the nearby hotel, and her remains had been inside the tire since 2017. Her parents were arrested the same day as the press conference released the baby's identity. The letter left at the hotel was the key to solving the mystery. 30-year-old Stefan Fountain of St. Joseph was charged with first-degree murder and abandonment of a corpse, and 28-year-old Lavisha Daniels of St. Louis was charged with abandonment of a corpse and first-degree endangering the welfare of a child. The letter allegedly written by Daniels states that she had completed her shift at People Ready, where she had been working on construction projects. She claims that after coming home, Fountain fed the baby before going to bed, and when Daniels woke up, she discovered her daughter in an odd posture with a towel around her neck and blood in her mouth. She claimed they both attempted CPR before she panicked and ran away while Fountain placed the baby in a backpack and left it at McKnight Tire. According to records, state identity cards were also discovered within the wallet that was left at the hotel. As a last note, Simone wasn't their only child. They actually have several other children together. On December 8, 1993, Valerie Brock found the lifeless body of a baby boy in her backyard in a rural area of Hugo, Oklahoma, and called authorities. The medical examiner would determine that the baby was born alive and then murdered. Now a homicide case, Choctaw County Sheriff's Office brought in OSBI agents to help. Agents conducted numerous interviews in the aftermath of the baby's death, including interviewing 25-year-old Myonia Michelle Allen, who was working for Brock and dating Brock's son. Despite the investigation, no suspects in the homicide were identified. The case went cold, but investigators retained samples of the boy's DNA for future use, and he became known as Baby Boy Hugo. Baby Boy Hugo's case captured the hearts of many in rural Oklahoma, with locals raising money to give him a proper burial. He was buried in January 1994 in Babyland, a section of Mount Olivet Cemetery reserved for infants who'd passed away. Fast forward to October 2020 when an OSBI agent teamed up with the Cold Case Unit and criminologist at the OSBI Forensic Science Center. They submitted DNA evidence to Parbon Nanolabs for testing, and by April 2021, they had results. Upon reviewing the results, the OSBI team pursued their leads right back to Myonia Michelle Allen. On June 15, 2022, an OSBI agent met with Allen at the Durant Police Department, and she agreed to submit DNA samples to determine if she was Baby Doe's biological mother. However, they wouldn't need the DNA results because about 20 minutes into the interview, she admitted the baby was hers and admitted to killing him after he was born and burying him in the backyard. At the time of Baby Doe's death, Allen worked at a daycare center and Valerie Brock was her boss, the woman that discovered the baby in her backyard and mother of Allen's boyfriend at the time. She allegedly said that she did not tell anyone about her pregnancy, the delivery, or the baby's alleged murder. The court document states that on December 7, 1993, Allen said she had spent the night at Brock's home along with her boyfriend, his son, and her daughter. During the early morning hours of December 8th, she had a physical altercation which caused her to go into labor unexpectedly at Brock's home and gave birth in a barn on the property. She said she carried the newborn to the house after his birth and laid him on a couch inside. She retrieved a weapon from the house and carried him behind the well house. Later that morning, Brock noticed what she thought was a doll in her backyard, but when she walked outside to retrieve the toy, she realized it was a newborn baby. Investigators had originally learned that Allen had spent the night at Brock's home, so they interviewed her on December 17th, 9 days after the homicide. She told detectives she had never seen a pregnant woman at the house. She initially claimed the baby had been stillborn, but a few days later, in a follow-up interview, Allen was shown the baby's autopsy report, proving that this was not true. At that point, Allen allegedly confessed to ending his life with a knife. She said she had intended to have Baby Doe at the hospital and put it up for adoption after his birth. Allen was booked into the Choctaw County Detention Center and is being held without bond. And Baby Doe can now be properly laid to rest, and his killer will now be held accountable.